Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight I'll be flying solo and I'm going to be talking about Silo, an Apple TV show starring Rebecca Ferguson and Rashida Jones and a few other people that recently dropped. And the first two episodes, one and two, I'll be talking about. It's like a 6 or an 8 series limited run based off, I think, a trilogy of books I've never heard anything about. Silo. It's an appropriate name for this, and we're going to dive into the physical and social reasons why. One of the things that intrigued me about Silo was that you hear about all these wonderful science fiction type films out there, and one of the things here on Extreme Movie Show that we like to do is talk about movies typically from the 80s or reference that, since that's my teenage years, and see how things have changed, how they're different, what works, what doesn't, and just kind of toss that around between people of all generations. And with science fiction, if there's not some key scientific constraint that's put on the human condition, it's just opera. Space opera is the old term used in books. Silo is interesting because it spends these first two episodes doing a pretty solid job of world building. However, when you're world building, and I think that's one of the issues you see in the majority of popular blockbuster franchise movies today, is this: the world is not what's important. It's the way what world you're creating and the characters that we care about are affected because of some constraint. And that's something that Silo, at least right now, appears to get correct. Early on, we've talked about how, like say in James Bond films, you have the opening gambit. We like to say something that hooks you in that may or may not be related to the movie at hand, and that introductory hook works for a lot of reasons if done well, because when you give a character or characters something to do, you see how they react to it and you learn about them by watching. And since this is a film, that's more important than the stupid talking that goes on. A lot of science shows out there and films like to spend a lot of time talking about the concepts and get all geeky and use these big terms, and they all science you to death when really you're not figuring it out on your own. And that's a mistake in storytelling, in my opinion. And that's why we're here to discuss it. So Silo, they're doing something I think with this release that is appropriate, and that while they release two episodes now, I believe it's going to be a weekly drop rather than just a binge. And that's great because it allows things to kind of gel and percolate and you can think about it. And the show definitely has multiple levels of things going on that you could look at, whether it's a political lens, a science fiction lens, a relationship lens. It's got some flashbacks to it, kind of sort of with the storytelling, but nothing too harsh, especially by today's standards. I'm wondering about the effectiveness of this could be told linear, but we'll have to wait and see with the rest of the episodes if that's the case. I know right now on Rabbit Hole on Tuesday nights that RDB from the Great Midwest and myself are discussing tons of flashbacks, everything that happens. You got, well, is it real? It's definitely a bit gimmicky, and although it's very over the top and entertaining, one of the things I've mentioned about that show, and like other movies in general, is I believe if you don't care about the characters or how they're dealing with the situation, let's say, then you don't really care about how great the world is, or how great the sets are, how much money spent on it. And so here in Silo, we're presented with a very intriguing option early on that you can call it the opening gambit. You have, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say married couple that we're presented with. And reason why this is important is because we get a little bit of a voiceover and we get some quick facts about the situation we're in. That there's people living in the silo. They don't know why they're in there or how they got to be. There was a period of time before the silo and after the silo that's referenced, and that's it. When you work in a silo, your function is to serve the silo, which means you keep the furnace running, all the different cultural and other societal things that come into place when you're in a closed system. Um, People have different roles and responsibilities. So that's all we know. That why can't we go outside? And there's a continuous shot that you see a lot of in this episode, two episodes of course, the local oasis, the watering hole, as it would be, the main cafeteria that a lot of people go to who have certain kind of jobs, and you can see the entire barren landscape on the outside. That's a reminder of why you don't want to leave. But there is like a rule, and we find this out, and it's done rather simply, which doesn't overcomplicate things, because a lot of things can buzz through your mind about what's going on. Is that if you make the announcement to anybody that you want to leave and go outside, um, it's kind of like breaking the law, but what they do is they honor your request and there's no way that you can come back. And so then they suit you up and they leave. That's it. That's the gambit for this show. And this married couple that we see, and I say married because I think they use a slightly different term. I want to say like approved couple, something along those lines. It's written in there. You don't know what the politics are of the people that are supposedly in charge because we're dealing with the sheriff and it's his wife. Um, it's an interesting thing because they are, as we find out, allowed for this is, I think, the third time to have 1 year to attempt to have a child. So they're being given permission by whatever this governing authority is about their ability to have a kid. So if you want to call that government, it's complete government intervention. And so it's their third time. They're, of course, going about their daily lives, and it keeps triangulating around them, looking at the clock, saying, "Okay, week has passed, a month has passed, 6 months. It's almost right before their last day that they're allowed to try and conceive, and they're seeing the doctor and getting updates." Um, it's actually pretty scary stuff, but it's done in a way where Rashida Jones, who's the lady, is you see her as a mom wannabe and a wife and a partner in a relationship dealing with it because they've been through this issue before. And the husband, being the sheriff, is struggling with it because he knows it's very important for his wife. And of course, they make all the grown up adult comments about, like, let's have fun with it. Let's not remember that this is work. Let's enjoy it. We love each other with it or without one, but we have 1 year. Let's make the most of it. So, in a way, it's kind of refreshing because you see this couple act like a mature, responsible adult um, pair that are doing what the majority of couples out there want to do, and that's have a child. And what's also cool about it too is as it goes on, you start getting some layers of other things that happen. In particular, um, you find out that there's a guy, I'll call him computer guy, finds what's called a relic. And a relic is anything that happens before, let's just call it the event. And you're not supposed to have them or be in possession of them. You get arrested or whatever that term you want to call it is. And he finds something that's kind of funny because it looks like an old mechanical PC hard drive that has information on it. And somehow it kind of got posted, but then quickly deleted. And that's a subplot in here. So, in other words, if you look at this from the macro level from the top, it's an awareness issue. All of a sudden, there's an awareness that, hey, things might not be exactly what they seem in this silo paradise. And you also have the silo itself physically. It's this gigantic, huge silo. Immediately, you might think of a nuclear silo that used to store a weapon, something like that, just on a big grand scale. And while I think it's supposed to be around 10,000 people, I don't know if they exactly say what the number is, but I want to say it's roughly mentioned there. It's about 120, 130 stories. And then there's like the basement area that the furnace is in, and there's some mining that goes on. So if you think of this as like a closed system and people mining at the bottom, feeding the furnace, which powers what they do have electricity and lights. They do have a spine that runs up the middle. There's, obviously a very easy way to physically see that you think the people that are supposed to be the elites and important would be at the top of the silo, and the people that are the bottom feeders and undesirables, if you think this in terms of societal class, are at the bottom, and a lot of people are in the middle, aka the middle class. It's pretty obvious, although they don't quite come out and say it or show it, because there's definitely commingling among all three areas. It's something that, like I say, that's going on in addition to this couple trying to have a baby, in addition to this, hey, what's going on here? Because we see that the wife finds out some information because she's dealing with this relic that's been found. And so between that and them having a baby, it's tough. And sometimes life kind of throws you a bone in a way. You get a reward. Sometimes you get a piece of bad luck too. Just lightning bolts happen, and that's the human experience. Well, it's interesting because there's a very, very old lady that likes to think of herself as being a natural doctor, and everybody's knows that this couple's trying to have a baby, so everybody's trying to give their opinions and thank them for it too. Because again, think about it: if you're in a closed system like that, it's a big deal that you reproduce and you have a child. So everybody's on them and working, happily together towards the common goal of just whatever their society is. But you can already tell that they're only allowed to read certain things. They don't really watch things. It looks like they have their jobs of various technical and mechanical skills and other things, but you don't know how much has been shielded from them in terms of, like, say, art and culture and everything else. And I want to say that it's mentioned that it's been around 140, 150 years since wherever this event was. And you see this old lady and her kind of get together, and you're not allowed to supposed to like try and convince people that there's something's not what it should be, like, oh, there was a time before that, well, you're not supposed to talk about that sort of thing. But it turns out that some information is communicated to her where you see that things aren't exactly on the up and up from the higher ups, meaning specifically when she goes to have a baby, everybody, it appears, the females are implanted with a reproductive device that does not allow them to have a child. You see it in an almost graphic manner being removed, and it's a very big thing that gets removed. So the doctor assures her that she's okay and it's fine. You have the ability to go and do it. Let's keep monitoring it and everything. And your first taste of, hey, things are not as what they seem, at least as far as this angle is. It turns out in a very great scene at the end. I'm trying not to go to hardcore detail because if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a watch. I'll tell you that right now off the bat. She ends up cutting it out of herself. And her husband, who's the sheriff, who's definitely, got blinders on, is just all about duty and keeping his wife happy, all that stuff. Um, she has a public declaration in front of everybody about how things aren't what they seem. So she's like that person shouting conspiracy type theories in front of this gigantic uh, cafeteria where there's a lot of people sitting around watching and going, "Oh my God, what's wrong with her? She's bleeding. She looks like she's about to die. She's cut something out of her side." And and of course, you've got the backdrop of that barren wasteland too, adding to all this, and the mayor who generally seems like she does really care about the people, but it seems like even she's a pawn, maybe. It's pretty heart wrenching. So watching this whole character interaction develop through the whole episode, you're going, what the hell is going on? Uh-oh, how's it going to end? And it turns out that she just yells out, I want to leave because we don't know. And of course, it's heartbreaking with her and her husband, the sheriff, because they put her in a jail cell and then they get ready to prep her for leaving the silo. She says, I love you. I'd be angry at you too, but you understand this is much bigger. I've got to know what's out there. And so immediately as a viewer, you're going, I don't know what happened with her kind of researching and investigating this relic that some computer dude found, but obviously leads you to believe that she saw something that was never meant to be seen. And it's, shook her to the core and her beliefs are now shattered. And between that and the fact that she cut out her own, uh, non-pregnancy device in there. When the doctor showed her that he did, it was a plant. So you're like, those fuckers never did it. They never meant for them to have a child. And you're like, you motherfuckers, what's going to happen now? Pretty chilling, pretty effective. It's well paced, and it puts you in a position. You're like, okay, you see her leave, and you see the husband, the sheriff, at the end, kind of not like it. And you get a little bit of a shot of Rebecca Ferguson at the end of the first episode. She's like an engineer that works on the furniture store like that. And the second episode, you're like, well, Rebecca Ferguson, who I think has an executive producer credit on her, to, you know, plus one for her for being involved here, not just as an actress, but as somebody involved in actually getting the show done and certain things about it. You see, she just has a really nice physique. She's just a very strong woman. And so in the second episode, you've got two beautiful women that are actually carrying the show, and it doesn't make men look weak. Try not to get too PC and politically oriented when we talk movies here about, what's going on in movies today, politically or not, all that other stuff. We try to talk more about the themes of what's occurring. And then here, again, nobody's made to look stupid. Everybody has a role to play. But again, first two episodes in, two different women, both leading what's going on, because it turns out Rebecca Ferguson's character was in a relationship with the computer guy. And the reason why it's important is because it's not an approved relationship guy. And this is apparently some years later. And we see that a little bit of storytelling going on. So you've got the sheriff who's all bent out of shape because his wife leaves him, basically, and he doesn't know why. It's not like they had an argument or fight or anything like that. And he feels bad they didn't have a kid. and he doesn't know what to make of all this. He doesn't know what to make of all this other stuff that might be going on too. And there's like a festival going on, and you get some little bit of the backdrop of what happens in society. People are cooking and celebrating and stuff. But what's interesting with this development here is in the show, and I don't know where it's going to go just yet. You've got very little of the science fiction part to it. And again, you only get enough of what you need from it. It allows your brain to fill in those details. That's good storytelling. Because when you're interested in what's happening with the people involved, that makes you emotionally attached to it one way or the other. And anybody that's ever went to have a baby or been a part of a situation like that, you can immediately identify with it. If you're an older person and you've had your experience with children and all that too, there's a few older people in here that have significant roles. There's not been a lot of emphasis on younger people, say below the age of 18 or really, really young. I don't know why that is. So we'll see what happens in the future on this show, because that's pretty significant. Why aren't there a lot of people running around like kids and showing them being educated or indoctrinated or whatever the term is you want to use for it? Because there's definitely a lot of you will only learn X, Y, and Z and not A, B, and C or whatever the hell you want going on here. But yet there's no particular figure that you can point to and go, this is the source of the malice and misinformation, or it's being run by one person or a group, or if you're into conspiracy theories, the NWO and all that elite stuff, they don't lean into it. They just focus on relationships, and that's what you should be doing. And here, when you see her in a relationship with this computer guy, you see it develop and all that. She gets the awful news that it looks like he fell over the side of one of the stairs. And she's like, no way. He would never kill himself. He was murdered. And they investigate it. There's no proof. Um, and by the way, the sheriff, he's so despondent, it's been a few years later, he wants to leave too. But you see in the back storytelling of this episode here of how it came to be in this situation for the current sheriff, because now there's one that takes his place or is in the place of him investigating this so-called murder, suicide, whatever, and they don't really find anything. But what happens is at the end of the episode, you find out that Rebecca Ferguson's character, the engineer in charge of the furnace, she is on the short list, and really the one that the first sheriff, whose wife left, recommended her to become the new sheriff, because we see in this episode how he came to believe that, oh my gosh, this is all related to what's going on. And there's an incredible scene where, again, talking about trust and relationships with people you don't know. Um, Rebecca Ferguson's like, hey, your wife knew something about this here, and something's going on, and they go down to this end of the very, very bottom where nobody likes to go, where just a few of the people work, and where she works, where the furnace is at, and they go to the end of the sun where the pipes are running through and all that, and it says, danger, blah blah blah, and it's that she moves this huge sign, and there's a hole in the wall, so they climb through it because computer guy had been accumulating some rope, and we've seen flashbacks how he was telling her he wants to investigate what's going on. He just wants to. And since it's not an approved relationship too, they're not supposed to be that conjugal, it appears, or at least that's what's implied. And the sheriff number one, the troubled one who leaves at the end of this episode as well, is going along with this and trying to figure stuff out. And they come across an old shuttered area that does look like it's a missile silo or a silo next to a silo. It's huge, it's cavernous, it's some great set pieces in here too, by the way, like an underground bond layer. They find an old little work area, and it looks like they're walking through a little bit of area that looks like it might have been a subway station, let's say, with graffiti. And they're like, well, who did all this? And they're like, well, maybe from before the event. And so they find this little area where you could see where Rebecca and computer guy would like meet and explore and all that. It's like their little mini base inside a base. They come across, and I don't know if it's supposed to be an inside joke on the show, because they come across another relic when they're looking at this small little toolbox. They see something, they don't know what it is. It looks like it's the Statue of Liberty, a little tiny artifact. Then they find something else I couldn't remember what it was. And there was a third thing that you're like, oh, that looks like one of those old digital handheld video recorders too. And they have no idea what it is, and they're investigating it. And then the fourth thing they find is, for you candy freaks out there, an old Pez dispenser. And they have a conversation about what it is. And you're like, what? But they get the rope. They want to go leave. You see kind of how that plays out. We'll leave that a little bit blank for you to watch because a lot of this is all of a sudden becoming a police procedural, a little bit of an adventure story. Not really too hard on the sci-fi, definitely not too hard on the politics. You see some people that with the sheriff number two, a younger dude, how he's not necessarily have control over stuff, and you can kind of almost feel where, hey, there's people with the elites that want to hear about stuff, and then there's this murder investigation that sheriff number one's trying to keep on the down low. But it's actually very easy to follow when you watch it. The flashbacks aren't too crazy; they're not too much of a flash forward. They make sense, so it works. And again, they're all related. There's nothing to waste here. Um, it's well paced, it's shot well, it moves well, and one of the last scenes you see of Sheriff number 1 when he makes the comment to everybody that he wants to leave, he gives his note to the mayor and to his, older buddy there about the Rebecca, the engineer, how he wants her to be that, and so they usually honor that request, and, you get a scene of the mayor, this older lady who's like, "Yeah, I've been going through all the old archives, reading about how many kids were born versus how many died versus how much food we did, this and that," and you're like, wow, you guys don't have these metrics down. They're kind of winging it. No wonder this whole closed system's not going to go as planned because it never does. But they're leaning heavily in towards making her the sheriff, which is, of course, Rebecca Versa. I think they're going to make her that in episode 3. But one of the last scenes you see, and it's a great visual shot, you see where everybody's watching the outside. When Rashida Jones left it in episode 1, what they say as they're preparing you in like a spacesuit, a biosuit to leave, and you walk up this huge flight of stairs, and then they let you out. Is they ask you to clean the camera that's on the outside, and you go do whatever you want, but you don't have to. So you see Rashida cleaning it or whatever, and everybody kind of cheers and they're happy, and then she walks off by this big tree and collapses. Well, when Sheriff number 1 goes out there, he kind of stops and he just wants to be with his wife. And so everybody kind of understands it and they're kind of sad and heartbroken. And he cleans and he goes off and they see him collapse by his wife. What we see is he goes, "Oh my God, you were right." And you see on his visor with just his eyes this shot of birds flying by. And you're like, uh-oh, it's not what they seem. It looks like it's, nice out there. So why are they keeping this image of a certain way of the people in the silo? We don't know. And that's what's intriguing about the show. It's at a good pace. Um, it's not in your face. It's very confident in its delivery. It's not trying to be too gimmicky or trying to trick you. It relies on simple storytelling, which can be done. And a lot of times that's not done today. But this is a classic example of where like Apple TV has done a good job with a lot of hits on these smaller shows that are interesting, where I don't know that they've spent a ton of money on them, but when you take look at something like, say, Dungeons and Dragons, that is a complete bomb and a complete joke to the IP and how horrible they screwed up, you go, why wouldn't any major studio do more of the let's go for the higher quality, lower budget type things? Because if we have several misses, that's okay. We can have several hits and you have a bigger audience. And of course, you get to own all that in terms of hours of product. And I had never heard of Silo before, never read the books, didn't know anything about it, and it's a surprise watch. It's very entertaining. If you like a kind of a thriller, kind of almost like a police procedural, this is your show. If you want something that's science fiction hardcore, there's no pew 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 with laser guns or any of that crap. But the show definitely is what I would call more classic in terms of science fiction. The acting as well. The set pieces are done well. This is a show that kind of takes itself a little seriously, and it's not overwhelming. There's not necessarily a sense of dread. You have almost a little sense of curiosity where the seed is planted from the beginning gambit of a couple that are trying to have a baby for the third time, and how that reveals how the world isn't necessarily what it appears to be. And I think that classic little bit of a philosophical nature, who we are, why are we here, and all that, no matter what your race, religion, creed, color, condition is, yeah, it speaks to us all on some basic level. And that's effective storytelling. Appeal to that, not the world, not the gimmicks you can do, not the fancy ways CGI may or may not be successful in telling the story. Just tell the goddamn story, and Silo does it. Episodes 1 and 2, Apple TV. Check it out. Definitely worth a watch. I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for watching, listening. As always, guys, have a good night. And remember, stay extreme.